The easiest way to discover a person's true character is to make them believe no one important is watching. Nathaniel Brooks had repeated those words for nearly 15 years, long before business magazines called him a visionary and long before his name appeared on lists of America's wealthiest entrepreneurs. They had become the quiet rule behind every decision he made, every manager he promoted, and every restaurant he acquired across the country. On a cool Tuesday morning in early October, while most executives would have been preparing for board meetings or quarterly reports, Nathaniel buttoned a faded navy jacket, slipped on a pair of worn brown boots, adjusted the brim of a simple baseball cap, and studied his reflection in a small apartment mirror rented under another name. Gone was the billionaire whose tailored suits and custom watches attracted attention everywhere he went. Looking back at him now was an ordinary man who seemed tired after a long shift, someone most people would never notice twice. That was exactly the point. Luxury could hide problems behind polished presentations, but ordinary customers revealed the truth. They experienced every smile, every impatient sigh, every careless glance that expensive consultants never saw. His latest destination was one of his oldest restaurants, a neighborhood location outside Columbus, Ohio, famous for homemade pies, fresh coffee, and employees who supposedly embodied the company's values. The regional reports praised the staff. Customer surveys were excellent. Profit margins remained steady. Yet Nathaniel had learned years ago that numbers could describe performance without revealing the heart behind it. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of cinnamon, toasted bread, and fresh coffee drifted through the warm dining room. Morning sunlight spilled through wide front windows, painting golden squares across polished wooden floors while quiet country music floated from ceiling speakers. Plates clinked softly. Coffee mugs steamed. Families talked about school schedules. Retired couples lingered over breakfast. It looked exactly like the kind of place his company promised to create. A young hostess greeted him with a pleasant smile before leading him toward a small booth near the windows. Nathaniel thanked her with an easy nod and quietly observed everything around him without appearing to observe anything at all. A waiter hurried past without making eye contact. Two cooks laughed behind the open kitchen. An elderly couple shared pancakes while holding hands across the table. Then he noticed her. Grace Whitmore moved through the dining room carrying two breakfast plates with calm confidence that seemed untouched by the rush surrounding her. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back. Her white uniform remained spotless despite the busy morning. She never hurried, yet she never wasted a step. More surprisingly, she looked directly at every customer she greeted, offering each person the same quiet attention regardless of their age, appearance, or clothing. Nathaniel had seen employees perform kindness before. Many became noticeably warmer whenever they recognized someone wealthy or influential. Grace showed no signs of measuring people that way. She thanked a construction worker wearing dusty boots with the same gentle smile. She offered an attorney reviewing documents over coffee. She listened carefully to an elderly woman who struggled to hear the menu, repeating each item patiently, without the slightest hint of frustration. Nothing appeared rehearsed. Nothing felt designed for praise. Nathaniel opened the menu but barely read it. Instead, he watched Grace from the corner of his eye as she moved naturally from table to table. There was something almost invisible about her presence. Customers relaxed when she approached. Children smiled without being encouraged. Conversations softened instead of stopping. It reminded him of something his late mother had once said. Some people don't change the room by speaking louder. They change it by making everyone else feel seen. Nathaniel pushed the thought aside. Sentiment could cloud judgment, and today was about observation, not emotion. When Grace finally reached his booth, she greeted him with the same professional warmth she had shown everyone else. "Good morning. My name is Grace, and I'll be taking care of you today. What can I bring you to drink?" Her voice was calm, steady, and completely free of forced enthusiasm. Nathaniel ordered black coffee, requested several unusual substitutions to the breakfast special, and intentionally changed his order halfway through explaining it. Most servers eventually revealed irritation under circumstances like that. Grace simply smiled, repeated the revised order perfectly from memory, and thanked him before walking toward the kitchen. Nathaniel leaned back against the booth, curious despite himself. The test had only begun. He believed he understood exactly what he was looking for. He had no idea that before the morning was over, 3 simple words spoken to someone else would stay with him for the rest of his life. Grace Whitmore disappeared into the kitchen, clipped the order to the service rail, poured a fresh cup of black coffee, and returned to Nathaniel's table with the same quiet composure she carried everywhere else. She set the mug down carefully, placing the handle within easy reach before offering a small smile that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. Your breakfast will be ready in just a few minutes. If you need anything before then, please let me know. There was no exaggerated friendliness, no polished sales pitch, only calm professionalism that somehow made the simple words feel personal. Nathaniel thanked her with a brief nod, then deliberately waited until she turned away before quietly sliding the sugar holder several inches across the table so it would appear to have been knocked over. A few packets spilled onto the floor. Grace noticed them while passing another table. Without hesitation or visible annoyance, she crouched, gathered every packet, wiped the tabletop with a clean cloth, replaced the holder exactly where it belonged, and continued serving another guest without mentioning the interruption. She never glanced toward him expecting an apology. She never sighed. She simply restored order and moved forward. Nathaniel watched carefully. Experience had taught him that patience often lasted only until someone believed no one important was watching. 20 minutes later, he tried again. When Grace delivered his breakfast, he frowned slightly as though disappointed. "I am sorry," he said. "I actually changed my mind. Could I substitute the hash browns for fresh fruit instead?" It was an inconvenience. The kitchen had already prepared the plate exactly as ordered. Many employees would have defended the chef or reminded the customer that changes were difficult after the food left the kitchen. Grace simply nodded. "Of course. It may take a few extra minutes, but I will bring the fruit as quickly as I can." She lifted the plate without the slightest trace of frustration. "Would you like to keep the hash browns while you wait?" Nathaniel declined. "Then I will have everything corrected for you." She disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. From his booth, he could hear the faint rhythm of cooks preparing breakfast orders, coffee machines steaming milk, and servers calling table numbers. No raised voices followed her request. No complaints drifted back into the dining room. When Grace returned, the plate looked untouched, perfectly arranged with fresh strawberries, melon, blueberries, and crisp apple slices. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "I hope this is better." Nathaniel tasted the fruit slowly while pretending to study the room. Grace had already moved on to another customer, kneeling beside an elderly veteran who struggled to unfold his reading glasses. She gently opened the menu for him and pointed toward the daily specials without making him feel embarrassed. A few booths away, a young mother apologized after her toddler accidentally spilled orange juice across the table. Before the woman could finish apologizing, Grace smiled warmly. "Please do not worry. Breakfast should be remembered for conversation, not for cleaning accidents." The mother laughed with visible relief while Grace replaced the napkins and quietly brought another glass at no charge. Nathaniel leaned back in thoughtful silence. He had visited dozens of restaurants wearing disguises over the years. Many employees remained polite because company policy demanded it. Others became warm only after discovering generous tips or influential customers. Grace's kindness appeared completely disconnected from reward. It flowed naturally, almost effortlessly, as though she had made a private promise to herself long before arriving for work that morning. Still, Nathaniel refused to reach conclusions too quickly. Every investigation required patience. Every first impression deserved to be challenged. He checked the inexpensive watch on his wrist, then reached for his wallet. Inside rested several crisp $100 bills. He quietly placed one beneath the coffee mug where it would be easy to notice. If Grace assumed he had left the restaurant, she might believe the money was forgotten. It was another small test, one he had used before. Some employees chased customers into the parking lot. Others quietly kept the cash. A few asked managers to hold it and lost and found. He wanted to know which choice Grace would make. Just as he stood from the booth and casually reached for his worn jacket, the front door opened with a soft chime. Cool autumn air drifted inside, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. A little boy wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt stepped hesitantly across the entrance, clutching a weathered backpack against his chest while looking around the busy dining room with uncertain eyes. Most customers barely noticed him. Nathaniel did. So did Grace. Without the slightest hesitation, she changed direction and walked gently toward the child, her expression softening in a way Nathaniel had not seen before. The little boy hesitated just inside the doorway, as though he was unsure whether he had entered the right place. He could not have been older than 8. His sneakers were clean but badly worn, and the straps on his faded backpack had been stitched together with blue thread by someone determined to make them last a little longer. He glanced toward the tables filled with laughing families before quietly lowering his eyes. The hostess looked uncertain, caught between greeting the next customers waiting outside and deciding what to do with the child standing alone. Before anyone else could react, Grace walked over with the same gentle expression she had offered every guest that morning. She lowered herself until she was almost at eye level with him. "Good morning," she said softly. "Are you looking for someone?" The boy swallowed before answering. "No, ma'am. I just wanted to ask how much a bowl of soup costs." Grace smiled, never once looking at his clothes or the backpack clutched tightly against his chest. "Are you hungry?" The boy nodded once but quickly added, "I have some money." He reached into his pocket and carefully unfolded several dollar bills along with a handful of coins, arranging them with surprising precision in his small hands, as though he had counted them many times already. Grace glanced at the money for only a second before looking back into his eyes. "Would you like to sit by the window?" she asked. The boy seemed confused. "Can I?" "Of course you can." She led him to a small booth only a few feet away from where Nathaniel still stood pretending to search for something inside his jacket. Nathaniel remained perfectly still. His instincts told him that whatever happened next mattered far more than the forgotten $100 bill still resting beneath his coffee mug. Grace placed a menu in front of the boy, even though she suspected he had already decided what he could afford. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eli." "It is nice to meet you, Eli. I am Grace." The boy stared at the menu for several quiet moments before pointing toward the least expensive item. "Can I have this?" Grace nodded. "That is an excellent choice." She started to turn away before pausing with a thoughtful smile. "Would you mind answering one question for me first?" Eli looked nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all," Grace replied. "I just need to know something important. Would you like crackers with your soup?" Relief spread across the boy's face, followed by the smallest smile Nathaniel had seen all morning. "Yes, please." "Then crackers it is." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Eli quietly studying the room around him. Nathaniel watched several customers notice the child for the first time. Some returned to their conversations. Others offered polite smiles before continuing with breakfast. A few minutes later, Grace returned carrying a tray. Instead of one small bowl, she gently placed a full lunch portion of homemade chicken noodle soup beside fresh bread, sliced fruit, and a tall glass of cold milk. The warm aroma filled the booth almost instantly. Eli looked from the tray to Grace with wide eyes. "I did not order all this." Grace simply adjusted the spoon beside the bowl. The kitchen had extra fruit prepared this morning, and someone baked fresh bread before sunrise. It would be a shame to let good food go to waste. Eli looked down at the folded bills still resting in his hand. "I cannot pay for all of it." Grace smiled so softly that the busy dining room seemed to disappear around them. She leaned forward just enough for only the boy to hear her. Nathaniel was close enough that the quiet words still reached him. "You matter too." Time seemed to pause. The sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversations faded into the background. Nathaniel felt something tighten unexpectedly inside his chest. 3 simple words. No performance. No audience. No expectation of recognition. Grace straightened the napkin beside Eli's bowl as though she had said nothing remarkable at all. The boy blinked rapidly before whispering, "No one has ever said that to me before." Grace gently placed the money back into his small hand and closed his fingers around it. Then today seemed like the right day. Without waiting for thanks, she quietly returned to the next table, leaving Eli smiling at a bowl of soup as though someone had given him far more than a meal. Nathaniel remained frozen beside his booth, unable to look away. He had spent years evaluating employees by policies, reports, and customer satisfaction scores. Yet in a single quiet moment, Grace had demonstrated something no training manual had ever been able to teach. Nathaniel slowly sat back down instead of leaving. The forgotten $100 bill remained untouched beneath his coffee mug, but it no longer seemed important. His attention stayed fixed on Grace as she continued through the dining room exactly as she had before speaking those 3 unforgettable words. There was no satisfied smile, No glance toward coworkers waiting for approval, no quiet celebration over a good deed. She simply refilled coffee, cleared empty plates, and asked an elderly couple whether they wanted another slice of pie to share. If anyone had walked into the restaurant at that moment, they would have assumed nothing remarkable had happened. Yet Nathaniel could not shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something he had spent years searching for without ever finding. Eli slowly finished every spoonful of soup, taking careful bites as though he wanted the meal to last as long as possible. Before leaving, the boy stood beside the register holding the folded bills Grace had returned to him. "Thank you," he said quietly. Grace smiled. "You are very welcome. I hope today gets a little brighter." Eli nodded, adjusted his backpack, and walked toward the front door. Just before stepping outside, he turned around and waved. Grace waved back before helping another customer carry 2 large takeout bags to the entrance. Nathaniel noticed something else. Not once had Grace mentioned charity. She had not told anyone she paid for the meal. She had not asked the manager for recognition. She had protected the boy's dignity as carefully as she had protected his appetite. That distinction mattered. Nathaniel had donated millions of dollars through company foundations over the years. Press releases had celebrated those gifts. Cameras had documented ribbon cuttings and scholarship ceremonies. Yet somehow those 3 simple words spoken in a quiet corner of a neighborhood restaurant carried a deeper weight than many speeches he had delivered in expensive suits. He remained in his booth long enough for Grace to notice the untouched coffee mug. She walked over with her usual calm expression. "Sir, I hope everything was all right." Nathaniel looked at her for a brief moment before answering. "Everything was excellent." Grace smiled. "I am glad to hear that." She reached for the mug and immediately felt the folded bill underneath it. Instead of opening it or slipping it into her apron, she looked toward the entrance. "Excuse me for just one moment," she said politely. Nathaniel watched as she hurried outside. Through the large front window, he saw her looking up and down the sidewalk until she spotted him standing near a bus stop across the parking lot. She walked over and handed him the bill with both hands. Even from a distance, Nathaniel could see her speaking. A moment later, she returned inside, the money no longer in her possession. Curious, Nathaniel left a few dollars on the table for the breakfast itself before quietly stepping outside. He remained far enough away that neither of them noticed him. Eli looked surprised as Grace approached. "Sir," she had said, believing Nathaniel was simply another customer, "I think you accidentally left this behind." Nathaniel smiled gently, choosing his next words with care. "Did I?" Grace nodded. "Yes. It was under your coffee mug." Nathaniel looked at the bill, then back toward the restaurant. "Would you mind doing me a favor?" Grace waited patiently. "Please use it to help the next person who walks through that door needing a little kindness." Grace hesitated for the first time all morning. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." She studied his face as though trying to understand something beyond the request itself. Finally, she smiled, not because of the money, but because she understood the purpose behind it. "Then I promise it will reach the right person." Nathaniel thanked her and watched her return to the restaurant, carefully folding the bill before placing it into a small envelope inside the register rather than her own pocket. No label, no announcement, no credit claimed. As the front door closed behind her, Nathaniel realized the morning had changed in a way he had not expected. He had arrived believing he was conducting another routine inspection of customer service. Instead, for the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether the person being tested had quietly become the teacher, and whether the lesson had only just begun. The drive back to headquarters usually gave Nathaniel Brooks time to organize reports, answer messages, and prepare for the next meeting waiting on his calendar. This morning, he ignored every notification lighting up his phone. The skyline gradually replaced quiet neighborhoods outside the window, but his thoughts remained inside the small restaurant where Grace Whitmore had returned a forgotten $100 bill and spoken 3 words that continued echoing with remarkable clarity. "You matter too." They sounded simple, almost ordinary. Yet the more he replayed them, the more extraordinary they became. They were not offered to impress anyone. They were not spoken to a wealthy customer, an executive, or someone who could change her career. They had been given freely to a lonely child who believed he needed to count every dollar before asking for a bowl of soup. Nathaniel had spent decades studying leadership, customer loyalty, and company culture. Consultants filled conference rooms with colorful presentations explaining how to build trust, and emotional connection. Entire departments measured guest satisfaction using charts and percentages. Still, none of those expensive strategies captured what he had witnessed in less than 2 minutes. Before reaching the office, he made one unexpected phone call. "Rachel," he said after his executive assistant answered, "please clear my afternoon." A brief silence followed. "You have meetings with investors from Chicago, the legal department, and the expansion committee. Reschedule all of them." Rachel rarely questioned his decisions, but even she sounded surprised. "Is everything all right?" Nathaniel looked out the window at the passing traffic before answering quietly. "I think I may have overlooked something important for a very long time." Less than an hour later, he stepped into the top floor of Brooks Hospitality Group, where polished marble floors reflected afternoon sunlight, and employees greeted him with respectful smiles. Everything looked exactly as it should. Efficient, professional, impressive. Yet today something felt strangely incomplete. He entered his office without asking for coffee, loosened his tie, and opened the secure employee database. Thousands of names appeared across dozens of states. He typed one name into the search field. Grace Whitmore. Her personnel file opened almost instantly. 29 years old. 4 years with the company. Consistently excellent performance reviews. Never promoted beyond senior server because she had repeatedly declined management interviews. Perfect attendance except for approved family leave. No disciplinary actions. Outstanding customer comments. Nathaniel frowned slightly. There should have been more. Someone with her ability to connect with people should have been leading entire teams by now. Curious, he opened every customer review mentioning her by name. They stretched back for years. One guest wrote that Grace remembered her husband's favorite pie months after his first visit. Another described how Grace quietly paid for an elderly veteran's birthday dessert after learning he always celebrated alone. A traveling nurse thanked her for staying 15 minutes after closing because an emergency shift had delayed dinner. None of the stories mentioned dramatic gestures. They all described the same pattern. Small acts, quiet dignity, genuine attention. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "How did we almost miss you?" he whispered to the empty room. Just then Rachel knocked gently before entering with a folder. "You asked me to bring the employee recognition reports." Nathaniel accepted the folder but did not open it immediately. Instead he asked, "Rachel, how many people have worked with me for more than 10 years?" She thought for a moment. "Quite a few." Then answer something honestly. "When was the last time I visited one of our restaurants without evaluating numbers?" Rachel smiled politely, but did not answer right away. "You always care about people," she finally said. Nathaniel shook his head. "I care about results created by people. That is not always the same thing." Rachel studied him with quiet curiosity. "Did something happen today?" Nathaniel looked again at Grace's employee profile, glowing on the computer screen. "I met someone who reminded me why I started this company in the first place." After Rachel quietly left the office, Nathaniel reached into a drawer and removed an old leather notebook that had belonged to his late mother. Inside the front cover, she had written a single sentence in careful handwriting years before he built his business empire. "Success is measured by the number of people who leave your presence believing they matter." Nathaniel slowly closed the notebook and sat in thoughtful silence. For the first time in years, he realized the future of his company might not depend on another acquisition, another investment, or another record-breaking quarter. It might depend on understanding why one quiet waitress had been living his mother's philosophy better than the man who owned the entire company. The following morning, Nathaniel Brooks arrived at the office before sunrise, something he had not done in years without an investor presentation waiting on his calendar. The city below remained quiet as the first light reflected across the glass towers surrounding headquarters. He poured himself a simple cup of black coffee instead of asking his assistant to bring the expensive blend usually reserved for executive meetings. Somehow the ordinary cup reminded him of the neighborhood restaurant where Grace Whitmore had transformed an ordinary morning into something unforgettable. He opened her employee profile once again, but this time he was not interested in performance scores or attendance records. He wanted to understand the person hidden behind them. "Rachel," he called through the intercom. "Please come in for a moment." She entered carrying her tablet, expecting another schedule adjustment. Instead, Nathaniel asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "Can you find out whether Grace Whitmore volunteers anywhere?" Rachel blinked in surprise. "You mean outside work?" "Yes." I can ask human resources if there are company-sponsored events. Nathaniel gently shook his head. No announcements. No formal requests. I want to know how she spends her own time when nobody is evaluating her. Rachel nodded thoughtfully before leaving the office. By early afternoon, she returned carrying only a slim folder instead of the thick reports executives normally prepared for him. There is not much, she admitted. She does not post on social media. She has never nominated herself for recognition. There are no interviews or public awards. Nathaniel smiled faintly. Keep going. Rachel opened the folder. One of the restaurant managers mentioned that she often leaves after work and drives across town on Wednesday evenings. No one knew why until another employee followed her by accident while taking the same route home. Nathaniel looked up with quiet curiosity. Where does she go? A public library. Nathaniel frowned slightly. Every week. Rachel nodded. Apparently, she spends 2 hours there after her shift. Reading? Rachel smiled. Not exactly. She handed him a single printed page. She helps children practice reading aloud, completely as a volunteer. No organization pays her. She signs in, listens to them read, encourages them, and leaves before closing. Nathaniel stared silently at the page. Rachel continued. There is something else. During the winter, she organizes anonymous coat donations inside the restaurant break room. Employees thought the extra coats appeared through management until one of the cooks realized Grace had been quietly collecting them from friends and neighbors. She never told anyone they came from her. Nathaniel slowly leaned back in his chair. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Grace did not perform kindness when convenient. She had built her entire life around it. Yet she had carefully avoided attention every single time. Late that afternoon, curiosity finally outweighed routine. Instead of returning home after work, Nathaniel drove across town in another modest vehicle and parked outside the small brick library Rachel had mentioned. Through the large front windows, he saw several children gathered around colorful tables covered with books. At first, he could not find Grace. Then he noticed her sitting beside a young girl struggling through a chapter book. Grace never interrupted when the child stumbled over difficult words. She simply waited with patient eyes and a reassuring smile until the girl tried again. Every successful sentence earned quiet encouragement instead of exaggerated praise. Nathaniel remained outside for nearly an hour. Children came and went. Parents thanked volunteers before heading home. Grace accepted every thank you with gentle humility, stacked the books neatly, pushed in the chairs, and quietly picked up scraps of paper left on the floor before preparing to leave. No photographs were taken. No speeches were given. No one applauded. It was simply another Wednesday evening for her. As she walked toward the parking lot carrying a canvas tote bag filled with borrowed books, Nathaniel stayed hidden inside his vehicle. He realized he had now watched Grace in two completely different parts of her life. At work and away from work, she remained exactly the same person. There was no separate public version and private version. Her character did not depend on who happened to be watching. Nathaniel rested both hands on the steering wheel and exhaled slowly. For years, he had believed great employees could be identified through interviews, performance metrics, and carefully designed evaluations. Grace Whitmore had quietly exposed the weakness in that belief without ever knowing she had done it. The greatest qualities could not always be measured. Sometimes they simply revealed themselves in ordinary moments that no one thought were important except the people whose lives they quietly changed. The next morning, Nathaniel Brooks made a decision that surprised everyone except himself. Instead of calling another executive meeting, he asked Rachel to prepare a complete archive of his late mother's personal journals that had been stored in the company records after her passing several years earlier. Few people understood why the notebooks remained in his office. His mother had never served on the board. She had never owned a share of the business. Yet every important value Nathaniel believed he possessed had begun with her quiet example long before success entered his life. Dust floated gently through the morning sunlight as he opened the first worn leather journal. Most pages contained ordinary memories about neighbors, family dinners, church events, and handwritten recipes. Hours passed as Nathaniel slowly turned one page after another. Then a folded receipt slipped onto his desk. It came from a small neighborhood diner nearly 5 years earlier. His mother had written a short note beside it in blue ink. Today I met a young waitress who reminded me that kindness is still alive. She noticed I looked tired before I even spoke. She brought me hot tea without asking. She sat beside me for 2 minutes after her shift ended because she thought no one should have to eat alone on their birthday. She never asked my name. She never expected anything in return. I hope someone is as kind to her one day as she was to me. Nathaniel stopped breathing for a moment. Beneath the note, his mother had added one more sentence. Her name was Grace. He looked back toward the employee profile still open on his computer screen. Grace Whitmore. The dates matched perfectly. His hands rested quietly on the journal as memories slowly returned. 5 years earlier, his mother had insisted on driving herself despite recovering from a medical procedure. She had refused special treatment, saying she wanted one ordinary afternoon where nobody recognized the family name. Nathaniel had been overseas negotiating a major acquisition and remembered only receiving a cheerful phone call that evening. She had sounded happier than she had in weeks. At the time, she simply told him that a stranger had reminded her the world still contained good people. He had never asked another question. Now he wished he had. Rachel entered the office carrying several documents before noticing the open journal. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. Nathaniel turned the notebook so she could read the handwritten page. She finished silently before looking up. "Grace." Nathaniel nodded. "She met my mother years before either of them knew they were connected." Rachel smiled gently. "Does Grace know?" "I do not think so." Nathaniel closed the journal with great care. "According to my mother, Grace never even asked her last name." Rachel remained thoughtful for a moment. "That sounds exactly like the woman you described after visiting the restaurant." Nathaniel walked toward the large office window overlooking the city below. Thousands of people hurried through crowded sidewalks, each carrying burdens invisible to everyone else. "Do you know what troubles me the most?" he asked quietly. Rachel waited. "For years I believed I built a company that valued people. Meanwhile, one waitress has been living those values every single day without needing recognition, promotions, or applause." Rachel smiled. "Maybe that means your company did find the right person." Nathaniel slowly shook his head. "No, it means the right person found us." The room fell silent again. Nathaniel looked once more at the journal resting on his desk. His mother had underlined one final sentence at the bottom of the page, almost as though she knew he would eventually read it again. "If you ever meet Grace again, remember that people like her should never be rewarded only with money. Protect them. Learn from them." Nathaniel felt the weight of those words settle deeply within him. The investigation had begun as another quiet test of employee performance. It had become something entirely different. He no longer wanted to discover whether Grace Whitmore deserved a better position. He wanted to discover whether he possessed enough humility to become the kind of leader his mother had always hoped he would be. 3 days later, Nathaniel Brooks returned to the restaurant without a disguise. This time a black sedan stopped quietly near the entrance just before the lunch rush began. The regional manager had already arrived, nervously straightening chairs that did not need straightening, while employees whispered to one another after learning the owner himself would be visiting. Grace knew only that a company executive planned to stop by. She treated the news exactly as she treated every other part of her shift. She tied her apron, greeted the first guests with her usual warm smile, and carried fresh coffee through the dining room without the slightest sign of anxiety. Nathaniel stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit that every business magazine had photographed dozens of times. Conversations softened as several employees immediately recognized him. The manager hurried forward with an eager smile. "Mr. Brooks, it is an honor to welcome you." Nathaniel shook his hand politely before glancing around the familiar dining room. Everything looked exactly as it had on the morning he arrived, disguised as an ordinary customer. The scent of fresh bread floated through the air. Sunlight warmed the windows. Families laughed over lunch. Nothing had changed except the way people looked at him. Grace emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 plates before finally noticing the unexpected visitor. She paused for only a brief second, then continued delivering the meals exactly as she had intended. After serving her guests, she approached Nathaniel with the same calm professionalism she had shown the man in worn boots several days earlier. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. My name is Grace. How may I help you today?" Nathaniel smiled gently. "Actually, Grace, we have already met." A faint expression of confusion crossed her face. She searched his features politely, but could not place them. Nathaniel reached into his pocket and slowly placed a neatly folded $100 bill on the counter. Grace looked down at it before looking back into his eyes. Recognition arrived almost instantly. "The forgotten coffee money," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded. "The very same." Grace blinked in surprise. "You were the customer." "Yes." A quiet silence settled between them, while several nearby employees pretended not to listen even though every word carried through the dining room. Grace lowered her voice. "I hope I did not disappoint you." Nathaniel looked genuinely puzzled. "Disappoint me?" She smiled nervously. "I realized later that perhaps you were testing how we treated customers." Nathaniel slowly shook his head. "Grace, when I walked through those doors I believed I was testing everyone else." He paused before continuing with complete honesty. "I was wrong." Grace remained silent, unsure what to say. Nathaniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed a weathered page protected inside a clear folder. "Several years ago, my mother visited this restaurant without telling anyone who she was." Grace studied the handwritten page with quiet curiosity. Nathaniel handed it to her. As she began reading, the color slowly left her face. She recognized neither the handwriting nor the family name until she reached the final line where her own name appeared. Her eyes widened. "I remember her," she whispered softly. "She came in alone on her birthday." Nathaniel nodded. "She wrote about you that evening." Grace gently touched the edge of the page as though afraid to damage it. "She was such a kind woman." Nathaniel smiled. "She thought exactly the same about you." Grace looked down for another long moment before handing the page back with great care. "I only brought her tea and kept her company for a little while." Nathaniel's expression softened. "That is what makes this extraordinary." He glanced around the restaurant before speaking loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You believed you were doing something small." He looked back at Grace. "My mother carried that moment with her for the rest of her life." Grace's eyes filled with quiet emotion, but she quickly composed herself. "I never imagined it mattered that much." Nathaniel smiled warmly. "Neither did I." For the first time since building his company, he understood that the greatest moments inside his restaurants had never appeared on financial reports or quarterly presentations. They lived inside ordinary conversations, shared meals, patient smiles, and quiet acts of kindness that changed lives long after the plates had been cleared away. Grace carefully handed the protected journal page back to Nathaniel Brooks, still struggling to believe that one ordinary afternoon years earlier had remained in someone's heart for so long. Around them, the restaurant gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. Coffee continued to pour. Plates continued to arrive at tables. Conversations quietly resumed. Yet something had changed in every employee who had overheard the exchange. They had expected the owner to evaluate procedures, inspect operations, and discuss business goals. Instead, they had watched him thank a waitress for treating one lonely customer with dignity years before anyone knew she had served the Brooks family. Nathaniel looked around the dining room before addressing the staff gathered nearby. "I came here believing I understood what made this company successful," he said calmly. "I thought it was our recipes, our locations, our investments, and our systems. Those things matter, but they are not the reason people return." He turned toward Grace again. "People come back because someone made them feel welcome when they needed it most. Sometimes they remember the meal. They always remember how they were treated." The manager stood quietly beside the register, listening more carefully than he ever had during a corporate visit. Nathaniel reached into his jacket once more, but this time he removed a simple folded letter instead of another document. "Grace," he said, "I would like to offer you a position." Several employees exchanged excited glances, expecting to hear the title of regional manager or director of operations. Grace looked equally surprised but remained silent. Nathaniel continued, "I am not asking you to stop being yourself. I am asking you to help the rest of us become better." Grace waited patiently as he unfolded the letter. "Beginning next month, I want you to lead a new program across every Brooks hospitality restaurant. Not to teach procedures. We already have manuals for those. I want you to teach something we have clearly failed to explain well enough." Grace smiled gently. "What would that be?" Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "How to help people leave believing they matter." The dining room became completely still. Grace looked down for a moment before quietly shaking her head with humble disbelief. "Mr. Brooks, I have never managed a company. I have never spoken at conferences. I am just a waitress." Nathaniel smiled with genuine warmth. "That is exactly why I am asking you." He paused before adding, Leadership is not proven by the number of people who report to you. It is proven by the number of lives you quietly improve. Grace looked around at her coworkers, then back at Nathaniel. If I accept, may I ask one favor? Nathaniel nodded immediately. Anything. Please let me continue working a few shifts each week here in the dining room. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. Grace glanced toward a family laughing together over lunch, then toward an elderly couple sharing dessert near the window. This is where I remember why kindness matters. I never want to forget that. Nathaniel felt a quiet smile spread across his face. In that moment, he understood his mother's final request more clearly than ever before. Protect people like Grace. Learn from them. Not because they were extraordinary in the eyes of the world, but because they quietly reminded the world how ordinary goodness could become extraordinary. 6 months later, every new employee joining Brooks Hospitality received the same first lesson before learning menus, schedules, or customer service policies. On the opening page of the training guide appeared 3 simple words printed in modest lettering. You matter too. Managers were encouraged to tell the true story behind those words, not to celebrate a billionaire owner, but to honor a waitress who never realized that one quiet sentence could reshape the culture of an entire company. Nathaniel often visited restaurants without announcing his arrival, but he no longer came searching for mistakes alone. Instead, he watched for moments that could never appear on financial statements. A server patiently helping an elderly guest read the menu. A cook preparing an extra bowl of soup for someone who needed encouragement more than charity. A hostess greeting every visitor with equal respect. Each time he witnessed those small acts, he remembered the morning he believed he was testing another person, only to discover that life had been testing him instead. And whenever he passed the booth beside the window where everything had quietly begun, he smiled to himself, knowing that the greatest fortunes are never measured by what we own, but by how many people leave our presence believing, even for a single ordinary day, that they truly matter.